The air in the boardroom was thick, not just with the smell of expensive coffee and new leather, but with a tension you could practically see humming above the polished mahogany table. I felt a familiar, almost intoxicating rush of power as I adjusted my bespoke charcoal suit, the kind of rush you only get when you've played the long game and the final move is exactly where you planned it. I was early, which was the point. I wanted to see the room, to feel the space I was about to take. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the culmination of 2 years of relentless, grinding work, fueled by a single bitter memory. Mark walked in exactly 5 minutes before the scheduled start. Mark Peterson, my husband, or what was left of our marriage anyway. He strode in, all confidence and tailored arrogance, a perfect illustration of the corporate hotshot he'd become. He was on his phone, barking orders to someone about a presentation deck, completely oblivious to me. He didn't even glance at the other people milling around, too self-important to notice the quiet woman sitting perfectly still at the far end of the conference table. He finally hung up and tossed his phone onto the table with a theatrical sigh. "Man, this merger is going to be a nightmare," he muttered to his colleague Jeff, who was scurrying to open a laptop. Mark ran a hand through his expensive haircut, and then, finally, his eyes swept over the room. They landed on me. It was one of those moments that feels like the world stopped spinning. The casual sneer on his face, the one he always wore when talking about work, vaporized. The color drained out of him so fast, I thought for a second he might genuinely faint. Mark, the man who never sweated, who always had a dismissive comeback, was completely speechless. "Jesse," he choked out, the name barely a whisper, a sound completely swallowed by the size of the room. He looked at my suit, then at the small, engraved name plaque placed neatly in front of me, the one that read Jesse Peterson, CEO, Technova. He looked at Jeff, who just nervously shrugged and pretended to be fascinated by a speck of dust on the ceiling. I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "Mark," I said, my voice perfectly level, resonating clearly in the silent room. "You look surprised." He blinked, trying to compute the impossible. He was here as the VP of corporate strategy for their company, a high-flying executive. I was supposed to be at home, or maybe running my little boutique software shop, as he used to call it. I was certainly not supposed to be sitting in this boardroom, across the table from him, preparing to merge my successful firm with his stumbling one. It was a chess move he never saw coming, because he was too busy celebrating his pawn status. His promotion, the one he'd been so proud of, the one he'd used to mock me, was the direct result of a calculated, morally bankrupt decision. He thought his success was earned, a sign of his superiority. He thought I was permanently below his level, happy in my secure, comfortable corner. What he didn't realize was that while he was busy sleeping his way to the top of his old company, I was quietly building a new one that would eventually buy his. That's the part that really stings, isn't it? The one you look down on is the one who ends up signing your paycheck. He took a hesitant step toward the table, his posture already collapsing. What are you doing here, Jesse? Is this some kind of joke?" His voice was regaining a touch of its familiar condescension, a nervous tick disguised as dominance. "A joke?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other. The movement was slow, deliberate, a silent promise that I had all the time in the world. "Hardly. I was invited. See, Mark, your boss, Mr. Harrington." He called me. Before he could respond, the door opened and a tall, sharp-looking woman from the legal team walked in, followed by Mr. Harrington himself, a man who looked permanently exhausted and completely out of his depth. Harrington's eyes lit up when he saw me. He rushed over, hand outstretched. "Jesse, thank God you're here. We were just discussing the final terms. Mark, good you're here. We can start," Harrington said, completely ignoring the visible, palpable, personal crisis unfolding between his VP and the CEO of the company about to save his firm. Mark stood frozen, his tailored suit suddenly looking like a costume, his tie feeling like a noose. His boss, oblivious, started pulling out chairs, ready to kick off the biggest business deal of his career. I met Mark's eyes again. They were no longer angry or surprised. They were pleading. He was trying to read my intentions, trying to find the old, forgiving Jesse. But she was gone. She was replaced by Jesse Peterson, CEO, Technova, and she was here to do business. My phone vibrated on the table, a message from my lead developer confirming the final technical audit was flawless. I picked it up, glanced at it, and then set it back down. A small gesture to remind Mark that I was here, fully present and fully in control. The silence stretched, and every second felt like a year. I wanted him to soak it in, to feel the full, humiliating weight of his own miscalculation. The woman he mocked, the one he relegated to the domestic sphere, was about to become his corporate savior. Or his corporate executioner. It was all a matter of perspective, wasn't it? The real show hadn't even started yet. I was just giving him the trailer. I could tell by the way Mark was frantically trying to catch Jeff's eye for help that he understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about a merger, this was about the complete and total restructuring of his reality. I gave the table a small, professional tap. "Shall we begin?" I suggested, the question aimed at Harrington, but the power behind it was for Mark. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But the best revenge, I found, is owning the house he lives in. And I was about to own his entire professional life. If you've ever been underestimated at work, drop a comment with the time and place you're watching this video. Mark and I used to have a shared dream. We were those annoying, bright-eyed college grads who genuinely believed we'd change the world from a tiny, shared apartment. But somewhere along the line, Mark got addicted to the corporate ladder, and apparently the corporate executive lounge. His promotion, which happened about 3 years ago, was the start of the split in our lives, not just our careers. Before that, we were on relatively equal footing. I was a talented software architect at a mid-sized firm. He was a project manager on the rise. Then his boss, Mr. Harrington, took a special interest in Mark. Mark went from a small cube farm to a corner office on the 40th floor practically overnight, complete with an executive assistant and a company car. And with that rise came the constant, needling condescension. "You should really consider moving to our team, Jesse," he'd say, swirling his overpriced whiskey in the massive, sterile living room of our new high-rise apartment. "You know, get out of the minor leagues." I'd be in my sweats, debugging code on the couch, honestly enjoying the challenge. "I like my minor league, Mark. We're stable. We treat people well." He'd chuckle, that dry, superior sound that always made my teeth itch. Stable. That's such a below-his-level word, isn't it? You know you're smart, Jesse. But you just lack that killer instinct. That willingness to do what it takes to get to the top. That last part always hung in the air, loaded with innuendo I was too busy to fully unpack at the time. I'd just roll my eyes and focus on my laptop. He'd never miss a chance to critique my choices. If I talked about a successful launch, good for you, a cute little victory. You know, we're talking billion-dollar contracts this week. If I stayed up late working, still plugging away at that small stuff, must be nice to have a hobby instead of a real career. He bought a Rolex, a massive, gleaming thing that cost more than my first car, and would constantly flash it during video calls, even when he knew I wasn't watching. Our apartment was a constant showcase of his ascent, designer furniture, art pieces he knew nothing about, and constant talk about networking with the right people. The worst part was the way he'd parade me at his corporate events. He didn't introduce me as Jesse Peterson, the brilliant software architect. He introduced me as my wife, Jessie. She's in, well, she does computers. Like I was a niche hobby he tolerated. One night, he came home after a particularly long week, completely drunk on corporate power and expensive champagne. I was making dinner, something simple, and he stood in the doorway of the kitchen, leaning against the frame, loosening his tie. "You know, Jesse," he slurred, shaking his head slightly. "Harrington was asking about you. He said you have great fundamentals. Too bad you're stuck in that firm." I kept chopping vegetables. "My firm is great. We have equity, not just massive stock options." "Equity in what? A playground slide?" He laughed, walking closer. "Look at me. I'm a VP. I have influence. I'm sitting at the table with the real players." He gestured around the kitchen with a sweep of his hand. "This apartment, this view, that's all from doing what it takes. You should try it sometime. Stop being so virtuous." That word, virtuous, he spat it out like it was a contagious disease. "And what exactly did you do that was so unvirtuous, Mark?" I asked, turning to face him, my knife resting on the cutting board. He just smirked. You wouldn't understand. It's high-stakes stuff. You're just comfortable. Content with mediocrity. He tapped my nose with his finger, an infantilizing gesture I hated. Don't worry, honey. I'll keep moving up, and I'll take care of you, down there on your lower level. It wasn't just his words, it was the look in his eyes, a blend of pity and genuine belief in his own superiority. He truly thought he was operating on a different moral and professional plane than I was. He thought his life was a straight, upward shot, and mine was a comfortable, flat line. What he didn't grasp was that my comfortable firm was giving me the time, the intellectual freedom, and the ethical grounding I needed. His high-stakes life was making him careless, arrogant, and blind. He saw me staying below his level, but I saw myself gathering strength, quietly observing his weaknesses, and planning my true ascent. I didn't argue with him in those moments. I just smiled a little and went back to my work, letting him believe he'd won the professional argument. That period, the high-rise mockery, cemented my resolve. Every dismissive comment, every sneer about my hobby, was logged away. I didn't want a promotion. I wanted autonomy. I didn't want to work for a Mr. Harrington. I wanted to be the only one I worked for. I realized that my stability wasn't a flaw, it was a foundation. And Mark's soaring, unsustainable, ethically compromised success was just a flimsy facade waiting for the right gust of wind, or, in this case, the right merger, to knock it down. Little did he know, while he was busy sipping his whiskey in his high-rise, convinced of my mediocrity, I was drafting the business plan that would eventually buy his entire department. I was learning a different kind of killer instinct, the quiet, calculated kind that doesn't need a corporate car or a flashy watch to prove its worth. It seems ridiculous now, thinking back to the time before the promotion, before the betrayal. Before Mark became Mark Peterson, VP, high-rise snob. We were actually fun, if a little naive. We used to spend our weekends in coffee shops, not reviewing stock portfolios, but brainstorming the next million-dollar idea. Most of them were terrible. Truly, spectacularly bad. But they were ours. That's what made the eventual betrayal sting so much. The memory of the shared ambition. The ridiculous projects we dreamed up on the floor of our tiny first apartment. The most legendary failure, the one we still joked about occasionally, was the crocodile dung sunscreen. Think about it, Jesse. Mark had exclaimed one rainy Saturday, flipping through a questionable article about traditional remedies. Crocodile dung was supposedly used by ancient Egyptians for skin protection. It's all natural. We just need to refine the source. I burst out laughing, nearly choking on my instant ramen. Refine the source? Mark, who on earth is going to smear anything remotely related to crocodile waste on their face? The marketing campaign alone would be a lawsuit. It's about the story, he argued, leaning in with that manic, pre-success gleam in his eyes. The exotic, ancient secret. We'll call it Pharaoh's Shield. We just need to isolate the active, non-smelly component. It's disruptive, baby. Nobody else is doing it. It became our running joke. Anytime one of us had a truly outlandish idea, the other would just look at them and say, "Is that before or after we launch Pharaoh's Shield, the crocodile dung sunscreen?" It was a code word for pure, unadulterated, yet shared, entrepreneurial stupidity. One evening, about 6 months after he got his VP title, but before I found the definitive proof of his affair, Mark came home looking completely deflated. This was a rarity. Mark was usually invincible. He threw his briefcase onto the expensive shag rug and didn't even yell about the mess, which was a huge red flag. Bad day at the top? I asked, looking up from a complex debugging session that was driving me insane. He sighed, sinking onto the sofa. Harrington is an absolute idiot, Jesse. I swear, the man couldn't run a lemonade stand. He just torpedoed my Q3 proposal, the one that would have actually made us money, because his mistress, the secretary, convinced him to invest in some completely unvetted, high-risk blockchain idea. I paused my coding. His mistress? He's having an affair with his secretary. Mark waved a dismissive hand. It's the corporate culture, babe. It happens. But seriously, the stupidity. He's so blinded by her, by that whole scene, he can't see a genuinely profitable idea if it slapped him in the face. It's like, why is that man VP of this entire division? I do all the actual work. He looked genuinely frustrated, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the old Mark, the one who cared about merit and execution. I walked over, sat next to him, and gently took his hand. "So, you're telling me you have to watch an idiot run a potentially great company into the ground because he's distracted by the corporate culture?" He squeezed my hand back, a rare moment of vulnerability. "Exactly. I feel like I'm wasting my potential down here, propping up an incompetent fool just to keep my seat. I could start my own firm and do 10 times better, but the risk." I smiled gently. "Remember Pharaoh's shield?" Mark actually cracked a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind I missed. "God, the crocodile dung sunscreen. That was a bad idea." "It was," I agreed. "But we weren't afraid to try it, were we? We weren't afraid of the risk back then. You know, you could leave. You could do something for yourself, Mark. Something clean." He leaned his head back on the sofa and closed his eyes. "Yeah, I guess. But the money, Jesse. The security. Harrington's a fool, but he signs the checks, and they're huge. I've sacrificed too much to walk away from this level of income now." The shift from the entrepreneurial dreamer to the complacent, highly paid cynic was complete in that moment. He admitted he was trapped, not by a lack of ideas or talent, but by his own greed and comfort. He chose the golden handcuffs over the freedom to be clean. I pulled away, the warm moment evaporating. I realized he wasn't really venting about Harrington. He was justifying his own acceptance of the moral rot in his office. He was already so steeped in that corporate culture he claimed to despise that he couldn't see a way out. That night was the last time we shared a truly honest, non-judgmental conversation. It was the last time I saw a flicker of the old Mark. I went back to my laptop, no longer feeling sorry for him, but newly determined. He might have decided to stay trapped in the dung-filled corporate ecosystem, but I wouldn't. I was going to prove that you didn't need to sacrifice too much to succeed. You just needed to be smarter, quieter, and infinitely more patient. The frustration I saw in Mark during the crocodile dung sunscreen talk was the last genuine emotion I'd get from him for a long time. After that night, his facade hardened. He became utterly convinced that his success was solely due to his superior killer instinct, and my career was merely a comfortable distraction for a woman without true drive. He doubled down on his dismissiveness, and I doubled down on my silence. I just let him talk, letting his arrogance blind him further. The truth, however, finally revealed itself not through some dramatic confrontation, but through a carelessly managed calendar entry and a tiny, almost invisible stain on a dry-cleaning receipt. It was a Tuesday morning. Mark had flown out for a 2-day emergency summit with an important client. I was tidying up the study, a room he rarely let me into, claiming the sheer volume of his top-secret, high-level documents made it a security risk. I was moving his laptop bag when a small, crumpled piece of paper fell out. A dry-cleaning receipt from a high-end service near his office. The date was recent, and the total was astronomical, mostly for a silk tie and one very expensive, stain-resistant blouse that was clearly not mine. The stain listed? Red wine and lipstick smudge. My stomach dropped, but the real, sickening lurch came from a realization far worse than simple infidelity. The blouse size listed was a distinct size smaller than mine, and the type of blouse was exactly what I'd seen worn by Mr. Harrington's secretary, the same one Mark had complained about, the same woman Mark said was influencing his boss's terrible decisions. I didn't panic or cry. I felt a cold, surgical calm wash over me. I needed proof. I needed irrefutable evidence before I burned down my entire life. I knew his laptop was password protected, but his corporate phone was synced to his desk calendar, and he often left it on his nightstand, trusting my respect for his privacy. That night, when he was supposedly across the country, I picked up his phone. I held it for a long minute, looking at my reflection in the dark screen. The person who had believed in the Pharaoh's shield Mark was gone. I unlocked the phone using the simple 6-digit code he always reused. I went straight to the calendar. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady, fueled by a terrifying focus. And there it was. Not just one meeting, but a whole pattern of them. They weren't just standard, dull-looking corporate appointments. They were labeled with cryptic, yet damning, titles. Late Night Prep with A, Harrington's Review, A, and Executive Strategy Offsite the Peninsula. The repeating initial, A, was all I needed to confirm the secretary's name was Amanda. The true gut punch, the thing that elevated this beyond a simple, painful affair, was a recurring meeting titled Review Session Promotion Strategy H&M. This meeting block was scheduled every Tuesday night, precisely 2 weeks before Mark's sudden, highly debated VP promotion. And the location? The expensive, upscale apartment building where Mark often claimed to be working late to close deals. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Mark didn't earn his way to the top. He didn't use his superior intellect or his famous killer instinct. He was sleeping his way up the ladder, using the secretary to gain access and influence with the dim-witted Mr. Harrington. He wasn't the brilliant disruptor he claimed to be. He was a corporate opportunist, willing to betray his boss's trust and his marital vows for a title in a corner office. The very thing he had mocked Harrington for, being blinded by a mistress, he was doing himself, only in a more calculated, career-advancing way. I put the phone back down. I felt physically ill, but the cold, focused part of my brain was already spinning. The constant condescension, the mocking of my below-his-level career, the bragging about doing what it takes, it was all an elaborate psychological shield to deflect from the disgusting truth of how he had actually achieved his success. His arrogance wasn't confidence. It was guilt trying to overcompensate. I didn't confront him. There was no point. Confrontation would mean drama, tears, lies, and a messy breakdown. I didn't want a divorce settlement. I wanted justice. I didn't want his money. I wanted his humiliation. I wanted to build something so solid, so undeniable, that the sheer height of my success would render his morally compromised achievement utterly meaningless. In that quiet, sterile, high-rise apartment that symbolized his dirty success, I made my decision. I was going to quit my safe, good job. I was going to use my savings, and I was going to build the antithesis of Mark's corporate life. I would build a company based purely on merit, ethics, and innovation. He wanted to play the high-stakes game? Fine. I would build the entire casino. I deleted the phone logs and the calendar entries. I crumbled the dry-cleaning receipt into my pocket. The evidence was secured, not for a divorce lawyer, but for my own personal, silent contract. I would not argue with him. I would just take his seat. The decision was made in the quiet, sterile confines of Mark's high-rise success, but the execution began in the loud, messy reality of my old life. After finding the evidence of his affair and the true cost of his promotion, I gave my notice at my stable job. The official reason was pursuing an independent venture. The real reason was escaping the feeling of being below his level and building a fortress of genuine success Mark could never penetrate with his cheap tricks. I didn't tell Mark. He was too consumed by his VP duties, i.e., too busy covering his tracks and navigating Mr. Harrington's incompetence, to notice the subtle shifts in my life. I started small, renting a cramped, drafty garage unit outside the city limits. It wasn't a romanticized Silicon Valley garage. It was just cold, concrete, and smelled faintly of old oil. My company, which I named Technova, was born there. My secure savings became my seed money. The goal was to build the cutting-edge collaboration software I'd always wanted to develop, something clean, intuitive, and genuinely focused on team efficiency, the opposite of the clunky, messy corporate tools Mark's company peddled. The initial days were a blur of caffeine, code, and crippling self-doubt. The layered conflict wasn't just my anger at Mark, it was the financial strain and the relentless skepticism I faced. My old colleagues, while supportive, thought I was insane to leave guaranteed equity for a garage startup. My parents were convinced I was having a midlife crisis. Mark, when he did notice I was working constantly, simply integrated it into his existing narrative of my mediocrity. "Still playing around with your little coding project, Jesse?" he'd ask, finding me exhausted but energized on the couch at 2 a.m. "Make sure you don't run out of money, honey. That VP salary is keeping the lights on in this palace, you know." I remember one Saturday morning, he walked into the kitchen, looking immaculate in his weekend golf attire. I was hunched over my laptop, staring at a flashing error message that meant 3 days of work had been corrupted. I looked defeated. He poured himself a massive cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "Look, I know this little startup thing is cute, like a hobby," he said, using the word hobby with maximum condescension. But you're a brilliant programmer. Why not come work for us? I could get you a managerial role, a real paycheck, benefits. Stop pretending you're going to be the next Zuckerberg from a dusty garage. The temptation was real, not because I wanted the job, but because the stress of the mounting bills and the constant debugging was wearing me thin. But the memory of the promotion strategy, H&M, calendar entry, snapped me back to reality. Working for him meant reporting to the man who profited from infidelity and lack of merit. It meant validating his entire, disgusting climb. I closed my laptop with a quiet click, stood up, and looked him straight in the eye. My company is called Technova, I stated simply. And I'm not looking for a managerial role, Mark. I'm building a solution. Your company builds problems. He just sighed, a big, theatrical sigh, and checked his Rolex. Okay, suit yourself. But when the garage rent is due, don't ask me for a bailout. He walked away, completely convinced that my failure was imminent and that he was the generous savior waiting in the wings. He saw my work as a petulant rebellion. He never once saw it as a serious threat. The real challenge was securing my first major contract. I realized quickly that my software, while superior, couldn't compete with the massive marketing budgets of established corporate tech firms, like Mark's. I needed a foothold. I needed a niche. I needed to pivot. I pored over industry reports, realizing that Mark's firm, while outwardly successful, was bleeding market share due to its antiquated, overly complex interface, a direct result of Harrington's foolish, non-technical decisions. My product, Technova, was designed for speed and simplicity. I made the terrifying decision to switch my entire focus from generalized collaboration to a highly specialized, secure integration tool for mid-sized financial firms. This meant discarding months of code and re-engineering everything. It was a huge risk, but I knew the technical weaknesses of Mark's company were a direct result of his boss's unethical stupidity, and that weakness was my opportunity. I worked 18-hour days, sometimes sleeping on an old beanbag chair in the garage. Mark would come home late, tired from his important meetings, and barely notice my absence, assuming I was still on my hobbyist schedule. He'd never see the bags under my eyes, the smell of burnt coffee, or the sheer, desperate determination that fueled me. He never knew I was constantly walking the line of financial ruin, all because the thought of him, sitting in his unearned corner office, mocking me, was more motivating than any bank loan. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark's betrayal, his cheap, quick path to the top, had indirectly forced me into the hard, honest, and truly competitive path. He had pushed me out of my comfort zone and into my destiny. He was the catalyst for Technova. 2 years passed in a whirlwind of code commits, investor pitches, and the slow, agonizing process of turning a desperate garage idea into a viable business. While I was fighting for every dollar and every client, Mark's life seemed to solidify into a gleaming, impenetrable corporate success story. He bought a new car, a ridiculously large electric SUV, and started talking about buying a vacation home. He was a picture of the successful executive, constantly reassured by his unearned title and massive salary. The physical distance between us grew, but the emotional chasm was a black hole. We lived in the same apartment, but occupied completely separate orbits. I was up before dawn, fueled by a single-minded vision for Technova. He was often home late, sometimes with excuses that sounded eerily familiar to the calendar entries I'd seen 2 years prior. I didn't push it. The marital problems were secondary to the professional mission now. He was a symbol of what I was trying to escape, and I needed him to stay complacent. During this period, the layered conflict was centered on Mark's relentless dismissal of my company as a mere hobby. He genuinely believed my efforts were a cute way for me to occupy my time before I eventually came crawling back to the corporate world, humbled. "Still tinkering with that small business, Jesse?" he'd ask, usually on a Sunday when I was reviewing the week's financial projections. He'd say it with a gentle, patronizing tone, the kind you use for a child who has drawn a particularly lopsided stick figure. "We're growing, Mark," I'd reply truthfully, carefully omitting that growing meant scaling from a 2-person team to 15, or that we had just signed our first 6-figure annual contract. He'd just laugh, the sound grating. "Growth in the hobby sector is still impressive, I suppose. Just make sure it doesn't distract you too much. You know, You haven't booked our last 2 dry cleaning pickups. That kind of oversight doesn't fly in a real corporate environment. He used domestic tasks as a way to remind me of my perceived, lower-level status. His implication was always clear. I belonged to the domestic sphere, not the high-stakes world he inhabited. The irony was suffocating. While he was fretting about dry cleaning and golf tee times, I was negotiating IP licensing and securing bridge financing. I remember a conversation that perfectly encapsulated his blindness. My company, Technova, had just been featured in a regional tech journal. A small article, but a huge win for us. I left a copy on the kitchen counter, hoping he might show a flicker of genuine pride. He saw it while pouring his morning coffee. He picked it up, skimmed the short piece about our innovative financial integration software, and scoffed. Technova, a local startup challenging the giants, he read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He tossed the paper down. Come on, Jesse. Local! You're challenging the guy down the street who fixes computers, maybe. We work with companies worth billions. Our annual budget is bigger than this little magazine's entire circulation. He missed the point entirely. He didn't see the merit. He only saw the size. He couldn't grasp that the small scale was intentional, a lean, efficient, debt-free operation that could adapt faster than his slow, bureaucratic behemoth. We focus on quality, Mark, not just volume, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Quality is nice, honey, he said, tapping his watch. But quality doesn't buy you a corner office or that new SUV in the garage. Let me know when you break into the real market. You know, when Mr. Harrington actually knows your company's name. Until then, it's just a hobby. A cute, time-consuming little hobby. That phrase, a cute, time-consuming little hobby, became my silent battle cry. What I didn't realize at the time was that his company, the one he was so proud of, was starting to show cracks directly related to the ethical shortcuts and incompetent leadership under Mr. Harrington. Unbeknownst to Mark, the high-risk, unvetted projects Harrington had greenlit, likely influenced by his secretary/mistress Amanda, were starting to fail spectacularly. The market was shifting towards the exact kind of efficient, focused solutions Technova was building, and Mark's firm was too bloated and slow to pivot. His blindness wasn't just arrogance, it was a necessary psychological defense. If he admitted my hobby was real, he would have to admit that his high-rise success, built on a shaky foundation of lies and infidelity, was actually far more fragile than my clean, garage-built empire. He needed me to stay below his level because he couldn't face the possibility that he had traded his integrity for a house of cards. So, I let him live in the delusion. I let him believe his success was permanent and my venture was insignificant. I needed 2 years of silence and underestimation to execute my plan perfectly, and Mark's predictable ego was the best defense system I could ask for. He never checked my accounts, never asked for serious details, and never looked up. He was watching his own high-level drama, completely oblivious to the fact that I was building the wrecking ball. Despite the growth of Technova, despite moving out of the garage and into a small but respectable co-working space, the journey was a relentless cycle of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. My biggest emotional hurdle, worse than Mark's condescension, came during a crucial period, about 2 years and 3 months into the business. I was ready to stop being local and truly challenge the market. My goal was to secure a contract with Omnicorp Financial, a massive, multinational firm. Winning their business wouldn't just be a contract, it would be a validation that my technology, the pure, merit-based solution, was superior to the bloated corporate systems offered by firms like Mark's. I spent 6 grueling months preparing. I poured every available resource into customizing our pitch, refining the integration tools, and calculating the exact ROI they would see. This wasn't just about money, it was about proving the entire premise of Technova, and by extension, proving Mark wrong. The day of the pitch, I was a coiled spring of nerves and adrenaline. I wore the sharpest suit I owned, my presentation was flawless, and my team had run 1,000 stress tests on the demo. I walked into the Omnicorp boardroom, feeling that familiar, intoxicating rush of a high-stakes moment. I crushed the pitch. The Omnicorp executives were visibly impressed. They asked sharp, technical questions, and I answered every one with the confidence born of having built the product from the ground up. I felt it, The contract was mine. I walked out of that meeting on cloud 9, the smell of victory already in the air. 2 weeks later, the email arrived. It was short, polite, and professionally crushing. We appreciate your innovative approach, Technova, but we have decided to move forward with a more established vendor, Harrington and Peterson Solutions. I stared at the screen, the rejection a physical blow to the chest. Harrington and Peterson Solutions, Mark's firm. The firm run by an incompetent fool and propped up by ethical shortcuts. They hadn't won on merit. They had won on size, reputation, and almost certainly a ridiculously lowballed, financially unsustainable bid that only a bloated company desperate for market share could offer. They had used their sheer corporate mass to crush the genuine innovation of Technova. I felt a wave of despair so strong it almost brought me to my knees. All that work, all that clean, honest effort, was wiped out by the very corrupt machine I was trying to fight. I realized in that moment that Mark was right about one thing. The real players often don't care about quality. They care about name recognition and the appearance of stability. I went home early that day, a rare occurrence. Mark was already there, oddly enough. He was on a conference call, sounding harried and annoyed. He covered the phone's mouthpiece when he saw me. "Hey, didn't expect you back so soon," he muttered. "Big day at the office." I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. The humiliation of having my life's work beaten by his shady company was too much to bear. "Just tying up loose ends," I lied weakly, sinking onto the sofa. He frowned, noticing my subdued state. "You look drained. See, this startup life is too much stress for you. You need a break. Unlike my work, where the wins are massive and predictable." He tapped his temple with a smirk. "Just gotta know the right buttons to push, Jesse." His veiled, self-satisfied comment, a subtle nod to his perceived genius for securing the Omnicorp deal, was the final insult. It was the spark I needed. The despair turned instantly into a white-hot, razor-sharp resolve. I realized I couldn't just beat Mark's company in a fair fight. I had to eliminate the ring. I couldn't play by the rules of the little league when he was cheating in the majors. The rejection forced me to rethink my entire strategy. I walked into my small office the next day and gathered my core team. "We're done with retail," I announced. "We're done pitching contracts where the only criteria are size and name recognition. They want big player stability. We'll become the biggest player." The new plan was terrifying. I wouldn't chase contracts. I would chase acquisitions. I would look for an established company that was failing due to poor, unethical leadership. A company with a solid client base but a rotting core. A company whose technology was becoming obsolete but whose infrastructure was valuable. I realized the answer had been staring me in the face all along. I knew Mark's company was teetering under Harrington's foolhardy management. I knew their technology was clunky and their operations were inefficient. The loss of the Omnicorp contract to them was the financial death knell they needed, not the salvation they claimed it was. They had lowballed the bid so badly that the deal itself was financially destructive. I decided right there, I wouldn't just build a better mousetrap. I would buy the house that housed the entire rat family. I was targeting a high-risk growth opportunity that was almost laughably personal. My new, ultimate goal wasn't a contract. It was a hostile takeover. The Omnicorp rejection hit hard, but it also delivered absolute clarity. My target was no longer a major contract. It was Mark's entire professional life. My team, small and loyal, understood the shift, though they didn't know the deeply personal motivation behind it. They simply saw the opportunity in exploiting the technical and structural weaknesses of an older, slower rival. We started compiling a detailed profile of Harrington and Peterson Solutions, HBS. HBS was a mess. Their public reputation was built on legacy clients and Mark's flashy, shallow marketing campaigns, but their internal structure was decaying. Mr. Harrington's obsession with high-risk, unproven ventures, likely whispered in his ear by his secretary, had drained their R&D budget and left their core product dangerously outdated. They were burning cash to retain clients with lowball bids, creating the perfect window for a targeted acquisition. About 4 months after the Omnicorp debacle, I was sitting in my office, reviewing HPS's rapidly depreciating stock value, when my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was for a major financial district. I answered, already on edge. This is Jesse Peterson. Miss Peterson, this is Richard Vance, CEO of Apex Solutions. We've been tracking Technova for the last year. Frankly, your financial integration suite is superior to anything else on the market. Apex Solutions. They were the biggest player in the enterprise software space, a true industry titan. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't process this. Was this a mistake? Mr. Vance, I appreciate that. Apex is a firm we greatly admire. Vance didn't waste time. Let's be blunt, Miss Peterson. We're interested in a merger. Specifically, we're looking to absorb a company with a strong, flexible platform that can be integrated into our main ecosystem. Yours is it. We've seen your potential. We're ready to make you a very attractive offer. I felt a surge of elation, but I quickly suppressed it. This was the moment of decision. I could sell Technova, walk away rich, and be truly free of Mark. But that wasn't the full justice I craved. Mark would still be a VP somewhere, smugly touting his corporate genius. The core of his betrayal would remain unchallenged. I took a deep breath. Mr. Vance, that is a generous proposition. However, Technova isn't simply looking to be absorbed. We're looking to acquire a platform that expands our footprint in the enterprise sector. Vance paused. Acquire? You're a smaller entity, Miss Peterson. We're a highly profitable, debt-free entity with superior, patented technology, Mr. Vance. I countered, the boldness feeling almost foreign. I have a specific target in mind that I believe is severely undervalued due to gross mismanagement. If Apex is looking for rapid, decisive market expansion, I can deliver it. I'll merge Technova with Apex, provided I have the backing and autonomy to execute an immediate and aggressive acquisition of Harrington and Peterson Solutions. The mention of HPS was calculated. Vance would know immediately that HPS was a competitor of Mark's and currently struggling. Vance was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Harrington and Peterson, they're a legacy client of ours in a way. They've been having cash flow issues. You want to buy them out? Why? I kept my tone strictly professional, hiding the deep, personal vendetta beneath corporate jargon. They hold valuable client contracts that are currently underserved by outdated infrastructure. My team and I can integrate their clientele into the Technova platform, backed by Apex's resources, in less than 6 months. The alternative is letting HPS collapse, which would create market instability that could hurt Apex. You know their weaknesses intimately, Vance observed, a new edge of respect in his voice. I know the technology, I confirmed. And I know the mismanagement. My terms are simple. Apex provides the financial leverage and resources. Technova is the operating arm for the acquisition and subsequent integration. I take a significant executive role, overseeing the combined entity and reporting directly to you. The offer was completely upside down. I, the small company CEO, was dictating terms to the major player. But I was offering them a surgical, low-risk way to eliminate a floundering competitor and instantly upgrade their core product offerings. Vance chuckled, a deep, satisfied sound. Miss Peterson, you have a killer instinct. That's exactly what we need. Send me your proposal. Let's talk specifics. I want to move fast on HPS. They're vulnerable. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but not from fear, from the sheer force of the rising drama. The game was no longer a hobby, it was an internationally backed hostile takeover. Mark's success, built on a cheap affair, was about to be obliterated by my merit-based ambition. The chessboard was set, and the final move was about to be initiated. The unexpected call wasn't just a business opportunity, it was the mechanism for my ultimate, inevitable revenge. The weeks following the call with Richard Vance of Apex Solutions were the most intense of my life. My personal vendetta had officially been institutionalized, backed by the financial might of a Fortune 500 company. The process of merging Technova with Apex and simultaneously preparing for the acquisition of Harrington and Peterson Solutions, HPS, was a logistical and legal labyrinth. I was no longer just a founder, I was an executive managing a multi-million-dollar corporate restructuring. The first, and most satisfying, phase was the due diligence on HPS. Apex's legal and financial teams, now working under my direction, tore through HPS's books. This was where the real rot, the true extent of Mark's ethically compromised climb, became glaringly clear. Mark had always boasted about the massive high-level deals he was working on, the deals that justified his VP title and the obscene salary. What the diligence revealed was that these deals, pushed through by Mr. Harrington, were financial disasters masquerading as success. I sat in a sterile Apex conference room, flipping through detailed financial reports that detailed the hemorrhaging of HPS's capital. The blockchain venture Mark had complained about, the one Harrington's secretary had supposedly championed, was a complete bust. They had sunk nearly a quarter of their available capital into it, and the technology was already obsolete. Worse, the massive contracts HPS had won, like the one they'd snatched from me at Omnicorp, were secured with bids so low they were operating at a net loss just to maintain market share. They were effectively subsidizing their clients. Mark was reporting massive revenues, but he was conveniently ignoring the even more massive, long-term costs that were sinking the ship. His promotion, built on the appearance of success and ethical manipulation, was built on a foundation of sand. "Look at this, Miss Peterson," said Sarah, Apex's lead M&A attorney, sliding a quarterly report across the table. "They're insolvent, essentially. 6 months of this and they crash. Mark Peterson's division, in particular, is a black hole of wasteful spending. Expense accounts are astronomical. Lots of client entertainment listed on weekdays." I stared at the expense reports. They weren't just excessive, they were reckless. The sheer volume of 5-star dinners, luxury travel, and exorbitant gifts confirmed my worst suspicions. Mark wasn't just leveraging the secretary, he was living a completely unsustainable lifestyle funded by a company he was helping to run into the ground. His arrogance had made him sloppy, blind, and greedy. I didn't argue. I just pointed to a specific line item. Note the spending on proprietary database infrastructure. They're running a completely unoptimized, custom-built system for client data. That's why their integration is clunky and expensive. Our Technova platform can replace that entire system, and the 24 employees supporting it instantly. My team looked at me with renewed respect. They saw a brilliant strategist. I saw an intimate knowledge of my husband's and his boss's technological shortcomings. The ultimate discovery came in a private meeting with Mr. Vance. He looked grim. "Jesse, there's a morality clause in HPS's internal structure regarding senior executive misconduct. If we take them over, it grants us a right to dismiss without compensation for any executive found in breach of that clause. It's related to conflicts of interest and the use of corporate power for personal gain." He looked me in the eye. "We've seen the patterns, Jesse. The expenses, the timeline of certain internal moves. It looks like Mark Peterson's rapid ascent and the subsequent financial recklessness of Harrington's pet projects are highly correlated with his relationship with the executive assistant, Amanda. Is that something we should be prepared to address?" This was it. The moment I could confirm everything, officially, professionally. I could have gone into the details of the dry cleaning receipt and the calendar entries, but I kept it purely focused on the business risk. "Mr. Vance," I stated, my voice measured and cold, "my interest is in maximizing the ROI for Apex Solutions. The current VP of Corporate Strategy, Mark Peterson, has demonstrated a significant and chronic failure of judgment, putting his personal interests ahead of the company's financial health. He is a primary source of the managerial incompetence we are acquiring. He has been aware of Harrington's disastrous moves and has actively enabled them to secure his position. Yes, you should be prepared to exercise that right." The irony was overwhelming. Mark used his affair to get promoted, and now, my knowledge of that same affair, carefully documented and framed as a business risk, was the key to not only acquiring the company but also ensuring his total professional demolition. The discovery phase of the merger diligence didn't just confirm Mark's guilt. It confirmed that his entire, towering success was built on such a flimsy, unethical basis that it was actively bringing the entire firm down. While he was celebrating being at the high level, he was too arrogant to see he was sitting on a ticking financial time bomb. I didn't have to detonate it. I just had to take ownership of the shell before it exploded. The acquisition of Harrington and Peterson Solutions, HPS, was now a certainty. The due diligence, driven by my intimate knowledge of the company's internal rot, gave Apex Solutions the leverage they needed to secure an aggressive, almost predatory deal. Mr. Vance, impressed by my foresight and surgical focus, gave me the final authorization. I was the operating force behind the takeover. I was negotiating to not just buy the company, but to take full control of the integration and, crucially, its management. The final weeks of negotiations were a frantic rush. I was dividing my time between the high-stakes boardroom meetings with Vance and his team and maintaining the facade of my cute hobby at home with Mark. Mark, completely oblivious, was more arrogant than ever. He was busy celebrating what he thought was a massive Q4 win, the one that was actually financially destructive. He was convinced HPS was invincible and that my little company was still just a quaint distraction. "Harrington is losing his mind," Mark complained one night, tossing his suit jacket onto a chair. "He's panicking about some vague restructuring rumor." I told him he needs to stop worrying and focus on my strategy. "We're VPs, Jesse. We're untouchable." I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch a documentary, while internally, I was reviewing the legal documents that would, in less than a week, make him my subordinate. "Untouchable?" I asked, looking up briefly. "Yeah. The big boys don't get tossed out, Jess. We're the infrastructure. Harrington might be the idiot, but I run the department. Besides, no one's going to mess with our stock valuation. We're too established." He walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights, a high-rise king surveying his temporary kingdom. He didn't know that the low stock valuation was precisely why Apex was able to buy HPS for pennies on the dollar, and he didn't know that he was the dead weight I was planning to either cut or repurpose. My final meeting with Mr. Vance was for the official signing. It wasn't just a merger, it was a carefully constructed takeover package that specifically catered to my demands. I insisted that the new organizational chart placed the former Technova leadership, myself included, in the direct line of authority over the newly acquired HPS division. Vance looked at the final documents, then at me. "You've done remarkable work, Jesse. The speed and precision of this whole operation are unprecedented. But I have to ask one more time, Mark Peterson. He's your husband. We're about to make him report to you, and we have the legal grounds to dismiss him entirely. Are you absolutely certain about this structure?" I met his gaze, my conviction absolute. "Mr. Vance, I've built a company on merit, efficiency, and ethical code." Mark Peterson was promoted via a path that demonstrates the very lack of judgment and principle that nearly sank HPS. Allowing him to retain a high-level executive position based on sentiment would be a direct betrayal of the principles of Apex Solutions and the integrity of Technova. He will report to the new CEO of the HPS division, which will be me, and the performance metrics will be strict. If he performs, he stays. If he fails, the moral clause is there for a reason. Business is business. I signed the documents, the name Jesse Peterson clean and bold at the bottom of the multi-million-dollar deal. The pen felt heavier than 1,000 pounds of crocodile dung sunscreen. It was the moment I finally reclaimed my time, my worth, and my future. I walked out of that building feeling the weight of the past 2 years lift off my shoulders. I was no longer the scorned wife building a cute hobby in a garage. I was the executive who had just orchestrated the takeover of my husband's entire professional world. That night, Mark came home late. I was still dressed in my professional attire, sipping a glass of celebratory and surprisingly cheap champagne I bought myself. "Fancy," he said, barely noticing. "Why the suit?" "Big closing today," I replied simply. "Good for you," he patronized, already heading toward the bedroom. "Maybe you'll finally make back some of that garage rent money." He had no idea. He was going to bed as VP Mark Peterson of HPS. He would wake up the next morning to the news that his entire company had been acquired, and the new CEO was already sitting in the conference room. I didn't correct his assumption. I let him have one last night of smug, unearned confidence, knowing that the morning would deliver the most satisfying, well-deserved humiliation of his life. His ascent had ended. Mine was just beginning. The morning of the first combined leadership meeting felt like the opening night of a play I had been meticulously directing for 2 long years. The stakes were astronomical, and the lead actor, Mark, had no idea of his lines or his ultimate humiliating fate. I arrived at the newly branded Apex Solutions, Technova Division corporate headquarters, which used to be Mark's company, HPS. The signage outside was already changed, a clean, modern logo replacing the old, stodgy HPS script. My team was already in the large conference room, buzzing with barely contained excitement. They knew the acquisition was hostile, they knew the old management was out, but they didn't know the full, personal gravity of the situation. I walked into the boardroom, impeccably dressed, and instead of taking a seat along the side, I walked directly to the head of the immense mahogany table. It was the chair Mr. Harrington used to occupy, the chair Mark had always coveted but never quite reached. I settled in, placing my personalized leather folder exactly in the center of the polished wood. The HPS team started filing in, a procession of expensive suits and nervous energy. Their faces were a study in corporate dread. They knew their company had been acquired, they just didn't know who the executioner was. Mark walked in last, his usual swagger replaced by a cautious, almost defensive shuffle. He was red-faced, likely having spent the morning fielding panicked calls about the acquisition press release. He hadn't bothered to read the new organizational chart. His arrogance assumed he was simply shifting from one high-level seat to another. He glanced quickly around the room, spotted me and froze. He thought our meeting a few days prior was an anomaly, a chance sighting. Seeing me at the meeting, dressed like a CEO, confirmed the worst. He looked at me, then at the empty chairs, then back at me. He was searching for Mr. Harrington, for someone familiar to explain this impossible development. "Jesse!" He finally managed, his voice strained. What the hell is this? Where's Harrington? You said you had a closing. Did you close a vendor deal with Apex? Why are you sitting there?" The room went completely silent. My team stiffened, realizing the connection. The HPS team stared aghast. I didn't answer him directly. I waited until every person was seated, until the silence was absolute. I tapped my pen lightly on the table. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice calm, strong and utterly devoid of emotion. "Welcome to the new Apex Solutions, Technova division. I'm Jesse Peterson, and I will be leading this division as its Chief Executive Officer." The gasp from the HPS side of the table was audible. Mark's face went utterly slack. The acquisition of HPS was executed by Apex Solutions with the operational expertise of Technova. Our mandate is simple. We are replacing gross incompetence with merit-based performance, and we are eliminating the toxic culture of ethical compromise that nearly ran this solid client base into the ground. Mark found his voice, a high, disbelieving squeak. You bought us. Your hubby bought my firm." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table, fixing him with a gaze that held 2 years of betrayal and mockery. "It wasn't a hobby, Mark. It was an ethically sound business, built from the ground up, designed to be lean, efficient, and technologically superior to the expensive, obsolete disaster that your firm had become." I picked up the new organizational chart and slid it directly toward him. "As for you, Mark, your previous position, VP of Corporate Strategy, no longer exists. The due diligence confirmed that the strategy under the former leadership was financially destructive and unsustainable. You are no longer reporting to Mr. Harrington." He snatched the paper, his hands trembling as he found his name. His eyes shot open in disbelief as he saw his new title and the reporting structure. "Your new title," I stated, delivering the final, crushing blow, "is Director of Client Onboarding, reporting directly to the new CEO, which is me. Your mandate is to transition your established, expensive client base onto the superior Technova platform. That's your job. Your VP title was an unearned perk. Your new role is a final chance to prove you have genuine, redeemable merit." He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "This is insane. You can't do this. This is personal." "It became personal, Mark," I said, my voice hardening. "The moment you used your promotion, gained by sleeping your way up and mocking me for staying below your level, to justify your moral bankruptcy. This isn't personal, this is accountability. And this is business." I looked over at the HPS team, who were now staring solely at Mark. "We will not tolerate the former CEO's reckless, ethically questionable decision-making. Mark, your unearned privilege ends now. You will perform the duties of your new role, or you will be subject to the morality clause of the acquisition. Is that understood?" Mark looked around the room, seeing no allies, only the cold, professional faces of his new leadership team. He was stripped bare, his success revealed as a total sham. He had nowhere to run. He just slumped back in his seat, defeated. The men who had mocked me for my entire career now reported directly to the woman he had underestimated. I had officially taken his seat, and with it his authority. The confrontation in the boardroom wasn't just a professional victory, it was a profound, seismic shift in my personal narrative. For 2 years, Mark's arrogance had been a silent weight, a constant reminder of his casual betrayal. Now he sat across from me, humbled and completely exposed. The meeting proceeded with brutal efficiency. I laid out the new, merit-based metrics, the technical overhaul, and the swift integration plan. Mark sat silent, occasionally scribbling something furiously, his pride destroyed. The resolution, however, was more complex than a simple firing. I had structured the entire takeover to force Mark to confront his own choices, not just to punish him. One final matter, I announced to the room, closing my folder. The former CEO, Mr. Harrington, is no longer with the company. Effective immediately, he has been terminated for gross financial mismanagement and abuse of corporate resources. I met Mark's eyes again. And Mark, as for the morality clause that triggered Mr. Harrington's dismissal, the same clause that we could easily apply to your own history of conflicts of interest and executive misconduct, I'm giving you a professional reprieve. You're being offered a chance to earn your place based on genuine merit, not on who you sleep with or whose incompetence you prop up. Your job will be demanding, Jesse's team will be watching, and your success will be based purely on your performance in this new role. The humiliation was complete, but I wasn't finished. I wanted him to understand the true cost of his choices and the power of my integrity. Later that afternoon, Mark stormed into my new, massive corner office, the office that was previously Mr. Harrington's, and the one Mark had dreamed of. The door slammed shut behind him. "You knew!" he raged, tossing a crumpled copy of his old promotion strategy calendar entries onto the desk. All this time, the garage, the hobby, the silence, it was all a setup. It was a response, I corrected him calmly. You thought my success was cute. You slept your way to a title while I was building a company based on real value. You mocked me for staying below your level. Now, you report to the woman you dismissed. He looked utterly defeated, staring at the panoramic view from the office he would now only enter as an agitated subordinate. I was wrong. The company is a disaster. Harrington was an idiot. My promotion was a mistake. He was finally, brutally honest. I just got greedy, Jesse. I saw the fast track and I took it. I thought I could get the title and then earn the respect. I never thought you'd actually do this. You only saw the latter, Mark, I said, standing up and walking around the desk. I saw the entire building, and I realized it was rotting from the inside. I didn't argue with you. I just bought the building. The marriage, of course, was over. The betrayal was too deep, the disparity in our values too wide. I had achieved the professional resolution I needed, but the personal closure required one final step. This is not just a job change for you, Mark, I said, handing him a sealed envelope. It's a complete life change. I have filed for divorce. That envelope contains the uncontested settlement. You can keep the apartment, the SUV, the entire facade of the life you built. I've already moved out. I don't want your assets. I only wanted my self-respect back, and that I've already taken. He looked down at the envelope, then back up at me, a desperate, lost look in his eyes. However, I continued, giving him a final professional choice. The settlement includes a final offer. You can choose to leave this job now, walk away with the settlement, and start fresh. Or, you can choose to stay in your new role. If you stay, you are choosing to work for a company based purely on merit, under my leadership, and you must operate with absolute integrity. It's up to you, Mark. Do you want to continue trying to earn your place, or is it time to quit the game entirely? I walked over to the immense window, watching the city below. I was finally free. I had taken his seat, cleaned up the mess he contributed to, and given him the chance to find the ambition and integrity he once had, the ambition that dreamed of the crocodile dung sunscreen, not corporate corruption. He didn't answer right away. The choice and the consequences were entirely his. My only resolution was my own, and it was complete. I had won by being clean, honest, and patient. If you enjoyed Jesse's story of clean ambition and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if you think Mark will stay in the job.